Hello and welcome everyone to Cooldown, a Desoladies podcast that allows Dota community figures a thoughtful way to respond to stories, controversies, and discussions in the Dota and esports scenes. This episode, we will be discussing the barriers that women face in the Dota 2 esports scene. My name is Leafy Peachy, and I'll be the host for today's show. Please excuse my voice, I am getting over being sick. I apologize for it sounding a little husky. But before we get into the subject, please let me briefly introduce the guest today. Our first guest is Lollipop. She is the co-founder of DotaBuff and Overbuff. She also led the well-known WoW guild Blood Legion for numerous years. How are you doing today, Lolly?
Good, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And moving on, we also have Kate McGee, a physical therapist with 1 HP. She was previously involved with High Ground TV and Standard Deviant Statistics before moving on to her current projects. How are you doing today, Kate?
Pretty good. Glad to be here too.
Thanks for coming. And lastly, we have Kipspol. She started her esports career as an analyst for Fnatic and is now working as a coach for Team Vegas Squadron. How are you doing today, Kips?
Tired, but ready to go.
All right, good to hear. Not the tired part, but the ready to go part. So, with the introductions done, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the subject at hand, which is barriers to women in esports. Specifically talking about the Dota 2 scene, but this does apply to many other areas of esports. So we're going to start with the basics. So, let's jump right into it. Ladies, what is sexism and how do we identify sexism?
Well, it's kind of a broad topic, isn't it? And there is a lot of knee-jerk reactions to it, like, oh, that's like a lot of, just like with a lot of other concepts, people are like, sexism is bad, and then the follow-up is since the people in this community are not bad, there is no sexism or whatever, or a few bad apples. But for me, sexism is more like the sort of the background radiation of what goes on in a scene like this. So it expresses itself in a lot of different and very sometimes subtle, sometimes less subtle ways that make clear that, well, women are basically less valued than men still.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to add to that is that it's important to like distinguish between overt sexism, which is what most people think of when they think of sexism. Like if somebody just says like women are inferior, like everyone's gonna be like, yeah, that's sexist. And that does, like, comments like that do happen in Dota, but what's much more common is like the subtle or nuanced or unconscious sexism where people kind of like are implied that women are of lesser value. And to me, that's what is harder to initially identify if you aren't looking for it. And there's like more shades of gray, and I think it makes it more malicious. Because if you have overt sexism, it's easy for you to be like, well, that's just horrifically sexist, right? Like, I can ignore that. That's stupid. But if you have subtle or unconscious sexism, like you're always getting feedback that you're bad at your job, and it's really motivated by bias, but you're not sure if it's really motivated by bias against women or what. Like you really have to like think about it and think like, is it me or is it actually just sexism? And it's really difficult to kind of try to understand that, because I think feedback can be important and understanding how to improve at your job or role can be important. But I guess like picking through various types of sexism you might encounter in the Dota community and trying to realize like what's legitimate criticism, what is criticism that has like a little bit of like bias against women in it, and like what do I ignore, what do I accept, etc.
Right, and kind of like what Kips was saying, similar to, I guess, racism as well. There's this immediate understanding by everyone that sexism, that is discriminating against somebody on the basis of their sex, which could be technically against men or against women, generally, not getting into the whole gender binary issue. Everybody accepts that that is a bad thing and a thing we should not be doing. And because we accept it as a bad thing, and none of us have this internal image of ourselves as bad people, the immediate thought process is, well, this is a bad thing, and I'm a good person, therefore I can't possibly do this bad thing. When in reality, it's, yes, sexism is bad. That's about as easy as saying the sky is blue and the grass is green and water is wet. What's a little trickier, what involves a little more nuance and a little more introspection, is what am I doing that is subconsciously or actively reinforcing unfair biases, inaccurate stereotypes? How am I allowing these things that I've kind of just let become foundational thoughts in my mind? How am I letting those be expressed? And am I doing it in a way that is unjust, that is unfair to someone who is a particular gender? I guess that's a better way of looking at sexism.
Yeah, that's a great way to sum it up. Did you have something else to add? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, just like what Lolly said about picking through good feedback in the community. I think that's something that pretty much everybody can relate to. Like, yeah, there's going to be people giving me feedback of this is a thing you are bad at, but how much of it is, the equivalent of Reddit telling casters they're bad and biased, and how much of it is actual valuable feedback from somebody you should be listening to? And that's not a thing that comes naturally to most people. That's the kind of thing that takes some practice to learn to pick through. And it's really good to have people who understand how that process works, who have learned how to pick through it. That's one of those times that it's really great to have other female mentors who can help you say, yeah, this is valuable to be listening to, and this maybe take with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a hard part is that sometimes the people you should be listening to will still be harder on you or have higher requirements for you, and you start asking yourself, like, would a guy really get pressured about this? Maybe not, but you still of course it's still valuable, but the pressure is going to be higher on you for sure a lot of the times.
Yeah, there is value you can glean from it. That doesn't mean that it's inherently there. And you're right, there are times when people who are valuable mentors are still have biases too, because hey, we're human.
Yeah, and in some ways I think it hurts more than a random Reddit comment when you have somebody that you trust and value the feedback of, and you're like, I think you're giving me biased feedback here.
Right, and it's a hard thing to then how do I respond to that feedback by saying, hey, would you say something similar if it were a guy in this situation? Because you're then giving them a loaded question of, I think you are being biased towards me, and the immediate response is, I want to be defensive about this, and that's not productive. But at the same time, you want them to understand, hey, can you maybe be a little introspective about your advice and consider, are you giving me the most accurate advice you could be, or do you have some biases that are in play? And that's not an easy thing to ask somebody to do.
Yeah. A lot of this is about reasons for me. I know there is a lot of people that would have reasons to not hire me for certain things, or reasons to not believe me about certain things, or question my knowledge or whatever. And those reasons wouldn't even come to mind when it was about, someone of the other gender. And that's the difficult part, that people have a certain reaction and then they justify how they feel by making up something like, oh, but she's inexperienced, or she doesn't have the knowledge, or she's being emotional, or that kind of thing.
That's something that's discussed really well in a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. A lot of times when people make a decision and don't necessarily know the reason for it at the time that they're making the decision, when they're reflecting on it, they'll justify it with reasons that are logical and valid and fair, but may not be the sum total of the reason that is actually at the heart of their decision. So, like what you were talking about, Kips, somebody might have valid concerns about your experience or the work that you've done, or your ability to work with a particular team, and they may present that as the reason, and they may genuinely believe that to be the reason, and not as though they're lying to you or something, but they may also have biases in play that they haven't been able to recognize themselves.
Yeah, that's really great. I think that's a really good springboard into our, the next sort of question that I had, and that is, you've given some examples, but what are various ways of how sexism manifests itself in esports specifically? What kind of examples for people listening that are, looking to maybe look for ways that they might perpetuate it or try to understand it better? So what kind of ways does sexism manifest itself in this scene on the esports level?
So there's a lot of different ways. The first one that just pops to my mind that I'm sure that everybody here has experienced is that if you're a woman and you're doing anything in Dota, there's immediately more emphasis on how good are you at the game, though. Like, are you legitimately part of the community, etc. Whereas like a lot of men who could be doing similar work or different work, like it never even comes up in conversation. But, you know, when you introduce yourself, say that you're doing something in Dota, all of a sudden you're like suddenly in a job interview about being a pro player.
How many hours do you have? What's your MMR?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, it's not, we're certainly not suggesting that, like, the Dota community doesn't also demand that of men to some extent, but there seems to be a special emphasis on it when you are a woman in the community trying to have any amount of respect for the work that you are doing, which may or may not be related to your ability to play the game well. There's this expectation that, well, you're not really a member of this community unless you're good at it. You know, you're not really a member of this community unless you've put in 1,500 hours and, you know, can CS perfectly on 3 different heroes and always optimally ward things.
It kind of happened the other way around for me, which is that when I got to Fnatic the first time, I've told this story before, right? They kind of already decided they'd hire me when they didn't realize my gender yet. But when I was there and I talked to 343, well, Adam, he's a really good friend of mine now. He's a great guy. But the first thing he asked me was, like, he looks me straight in the eye and he says, "Do you play the game?" I was like, "You what, mate?"
I'm applying for the role of your analyst, but no, I've never played the game in my life.
Never touched it.
They'd already flown me out to Manila. I was sitting there in the training room with him, and he asks me. And it's
Bless his heart.
Yeah, and that's like, it's not anything, like, he's not a bad person for asking that. But he, like, it does show that the assumption is that I don't. Or that I, like...
Might not, right?
That's kind of like one of those, like, foundational thoughts that I was talking about. Like, we all have them, like, various, like, things we've kind of built into our identity or, like, the stereotypes that we hold. And stereotypes can be useful because, you know, they help us make general and sometimes accurate assumptions about a group of people because our brain can only hold on to so many pieces of information at one time. But kind of, it seems like one of those foundational thoughts for a lot of people in Dota is it's less likely for a woman who I come in contact with to be playing the game. And if she does play the game, it's less likely that she'd be good at the game. And if she plays the game, she probably started playing because there was a guy in her life that was playing that wanted her to play. Yeah. Which, some of those things are true. There are fewer women who play Dota than men, which is probably something we'll get to talking about later. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are probably some women in the scene who've been introduced to it through their significant others or brothers or whatever. And sure, there are women in this game who are not as good as some other people in this game. Me and my 1.4k MMR would like to apologize for that fact. But that's not to say that there aren't also women in this game who are quite good, who do play a lot, who came to it because they just like gaming in general. And the stereotypes that exist about women in the scene can be very damaging to people wanting to join at all, and especially for women who want to work in the scene and not necessarily grind MMR to feel as though they are valued or respected.
Okay, yeah. What are some other stereotypes that follow women that are pursuing like a professional job in esports and in the Dota scene?
That you got there by sleeping with someone.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Is like, that is another one that happened. Like, it took 2 or 3 tournaments with people seeing me behind the scenes for them to stop asking. And it's like, it's not like one person asks repeatedly, but like, you know, 1 in every 2 or 3 people you meet goes, "Hey, whose girlfriend are you?"
Yep. And I have a very strict rule about I don't ever date patients because that is actually illegal and unethical and it's not something I would ever do in the first place. But I have a general policy that I will not be romantically involved with anybody in esports, mostly to avoid that issue. Like the accusation or the suspicion or the expectation that I got to where I was by sleeping with somebody.
Totally. Like,
I think a lot of people bring that up.
Yeah, I would never date anyone in Dota. It's not that there aren't like nice people to date in
They're
Dota.
perfectly nice people worth dating in Dota.
Yeah, totally. But like, I just don't want to like muddy that water at all. Like, no thanks.
Yep. And then there's the other aspect of there are women who got involved in Dota to some extent because they were dating someone or they had a sibling who was involved, and that doesn't make them any less valuable contributors in the scene. Like, there are plenty of them that was their introduction, and they've gone on to do things that genuinely contribute to the value of this community. And it's still, there's this dismissiveness of, well, she's only here because she's sleeping with so-and-so.
Yeah, because she
there
dated someone for like 6 months at the beginning of her career 5 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, when I interviewed, when I interviewed the team managers on the grill a few months ago, in reaction to that, I saw a lot of comments from people, both men and women, that were basically along the thread of they're only there because they're the girlfriend of the player. Like, they don't deserve that job. They're just there because, they're the significant other. And it's, if they had watched the interview, these team managers dedicate so much time and energy, and they're very good at what they do, and even though, they obviously might have been introduced to the scene, and some of them weren't even introduced to the scene because of their significant other, like Helen, she was a translator before.
Right.
But, just seeing, like, women being discredited for the work that they do, the good work that they do, due to that is, a textbook example of that.
If you do good work in this scene, who gives a shit how you got here? Like, the fact that you've had sex with a Dota player does not make you any less capable of being competent at your job.
Yes, exactly. What are some other ways that sexism manifests itself in esports? So we've kind of talked about stereotypes. What are some other things? Something that comes to my mind is harassment, obviously. You see that pretty commonly. And actually, I think a lot doesn't get seen. And, we've kind of talked about that a little bit, like on Twitter a few months ago with the Me Too threads. There's a lot that goes unseen, I believe, because it doesn't get dealt with properly. But what are y'all's thoughts on that?
I mean, I've gotten, like, death threats and rape threats, I think, related to my gender. Some of them were definitely not related to my gender, but some of them definitely
that makes them so much better.
Yeah, I'm saying some of them, it was not necessarily about my gender, right? But, yeah, like, I've just gotten nasty, specific, kind of scary comments that it's just like, what are you doing with your life/day that this was what was important to send to me,
I think that I don't use my mic much in games unless I'm playing with a stack, and even then I'll just hop on Discord with my friends and I won't actually use open mic in games. With one hilarious exception of one time I left open mic on and I was singing Let It Go when I was playing CM and I ulted and my team thought it was hilarious. That's the single best mic experience I've had in a game. But other than that, I don't use it. Partly because, sometimes there is a risk that people will spend the game harassing me. I've had people feed because of it. Partly because sometimes it's just really annoying to deal with somebody saying, like, OMG, a grill. And, like, they don't even mean it meanly. They're genuinely excited about having a girl in their game because this is a rare and exciting thing. But, like, I don't want to be a rare and exciting thing. I'm just somebody else playing Dota. And I want you to actually get last hits, damn it. I don't give a shit what you think about me.
Worse than that, like, I've had games where we're winning and we're doing really well, that I talk on mic and everybody loses their fucking minds and then starts throwing.
Yep.
Because they're just, like, talking about that there's a girl here. Or
there's a girl in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, damn it, play the game.
That's
Don't
why I wait
this.
till the very end of the game when the Ancient's, like, blowing up where I'm like, good game. And everybody's like,
I think the most common harassment I've gotten, though, is, let me just say, I have no issue with dumb, repetitive jokes. I like puns. I like really terrible puns. But the one joke that I get constantly, being a woman and doing physical therapy, most commonly on hands, is jokes about giving hand jobs. It's just like, on the one hand, it is, in fact, sexist and frustrating, and it disregards the fact that I put, 6.5 years of my life into getting a doctoral degree, and the work I do on players is frequently subsidized by the 9-to-5 job I have at a hospital, and isn't necessarily, paid out as well as it could be in the esports scene. But in addition to being, sexist, wrong, inaccurate, and disrespectful, it's also really annoying. Could you guys get a better joke, please?
yeah.
It's always the same things, and it's almost like people don't realize that everyone else is making the same jokes and asking the same questions. It's like everyone is discovering, especially if you react negatively, like everyone is discovering that you have interactions with other people that are exactly the same for the first time.
Sometimes I wonder if some people have like a wheel that they spin, and then they're like, okay, this time I'm gonna ask for them to make me a sandwich. Or it'll land on like, oh my god, grill, and they just like spin
12-year-old boy?
12-year-old boy or grill?
They like literally just don't have an original joke or thought or anything.
Although in a Dota match the other night, someone told me because of my sick voice I sounded like a 15-year-old boy, so I'm moving up.
You're 3 years older.
Ooh.
Yes.
I mean, it's...
I always get asked if I can go back to the kitchen, which is, I don't know if they're like psychic or something, but I do actually play from the kitchen. My laptop is in the kitchen.
Ha! Joke's on you, I'm already there.
Yeah, I will open my mic and they can hear my housemates clanging with the pots and pans.
I think also, and some people might say, well, this is stuff that's in game, you should just mute people, you know, or on Twitter. But I think people also underestimate, like Kip said, you know, people don't realize like the level of attention, the volume of these things that like every woman that reveals her gender online, and especially someone that's pursuing work in the professional scene, you know, you're putting yourself out there, yes, and you should obviously expect criticism and things like that, but things like this wear people down. They wear women down, and you know, even, you know, we've all heard stories of in the scene, like harassment that takes place in the scene, and you know, you see streamers and things like that. You know, there's tons of examples of people who have dealt with harassment from a multitude of sources, and it just wears you down. And so that's why it's important to talk about and try to recognize that this is part of the problem. It might not be 100% of the problem, but it is part of the problem.
And what you talked about with, you know, oh, just, you know, don't use your mic, or just mute those players, or just mute and block them online. Like, yes, those are things that I can do to manage the volume of the shit that hits me. But that doesn't change anything about the volume of the shit that's being thrown at me. That's something that has to be addressed on the thrower's end. So yes, I can, and other women can, take steps to prevent so much of it from getting to me, but that doesn't mean that it's not still out there and being directed at people. And I think that's more of what we're concerned about and addressing. Not so much how do I make sure that I am insulated from this, but how do I make sure that people don't feel the need to do it in the first place.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that the response is you like this community and you want to make it better is, well, stop trying to make it better and just ignore the bad parts.
Yeah, just ignore the bad parts and stop trying to make it better, and then you'll be fine. That's not how that works.
Yeah. That's fine if you are, and people hate the word privilege, but if you are not one of the people that gets harassed on the daily, you have the privilege to say, well, sure, we don't have to change things. Mm-hmm. What are you complaining about?
Because they can ignore it.
Yeah, because it's not even. I would happily trade wading through like the foot of shit that men get thrown at them, instead of the meter of shit that I get to wade through.
Oh yeah.
Kip, you've just promptly confused all of our American listeners. For reference, that's about 3 feet of shit, not just one.
Yeah, I woke up this morning and I checked my email and I saw I had 10 emails on the Desoladies account, and it was new applications because someone on Reddit had linked our application page for a woman that was looking for a women's group, and a lot of it was people saying, like trolls from Reddit, you know, saying that they want to do horrible things to our members, and it was about 9 applications with very vulgar things in them, and it was very disturbing to wake up to. But I was just thinking, I'm like, you know, this is why we need like women's spaces and why we need to talk about this. Like, I was like, this is so timely for the discussion that we're talking about right now.
Right, and here's the thing, like,
horrible.
We'd love to not have to have dedicated, set-aside spaces just for women. We'd love for that not to be a necessary thing. But when you make a space and you get 9 out of 10 applications that are people trolling and saying, I want to fuck various members of your group, can you understand maybe why women might want a space that's just theirs?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if I can play a game of Dota with people of approximately equal skill who aren't going to harass me versus people who are going to suggest that they want to do various things to me that I may or may not consent to, which group do you think I'm going to play Dota with?
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Tough.
And if you're
call.
listening, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, oh, I'm gonna wait for them to say something stupid so I control my comments, like, just know that,
Oh,
like,
bless your hearts.
like, screw you, and you're probably not gonna say something original. You're just gonna spin your wheel of random shit that is
Yeah,
biased
we've all
against
heard
women,
before.
basically. Yeah.
So I want to swing it back around a little bit more to esports. We've talked a little bit. We've obviously been talking about esports, but I want to talk about other ways that sexism presents itself in esports, and that's one way that I was thinking about is about low representation. And we're going to talk a little bit more later on about arguments against that, but let's talk about what are y'all's thoughts about like the low representation of women as personalities and, you know, just working professionally in the scene. Doesn't have to be personality, but, and then also just like the things that maybe male members of the professional community, things they might not realize that they do that might make it more uncomfortable or harder for women to enter the scene.
So I'm gonna preface this part by kind of countering the immediate troll argument that tends to be presented at this. Yes, the percentage of people that play video games is growing, but still not, you know, the entire world or anything. The percentage of people who are capable of playing at a competitive high-tier esports level is a very small percentage, akin to the number of people who would go into a competitive NFL career. We're not suggesting that there's a very large population pool to be drawing from when it comes to this. That being said, we look at the groups that we have who play video games, and then we look at, you know, those higher echelons of players, of broadcasters, of coaches, of people working in the backgrounds, and we see that there are so many more men than women. It doesn't seem to be just this is a limited population we have available to us. This seems to be we have a limited population, and there are also systemic issues that we're coping with that mean women are even less likely to be represented within that group. All right, carry on.
Yeah, I mean,
did either
if you have like 9% of women in Dota in general, I think that's about the estimate, right? Between like 7 and 9, maybe.
I think it's between 4 and 9%. I'll check my Google
Between 4
Analytics.
We'll go sub 10%-ish.
We can go with 5. It's fine. Then still,
5 sounds good.
you know, if there's no systemic issues whatsoever, 1 in 20 pro players should be a woman, right?
Mhm.
And they aren't. In fact, there are none of them. And I can probably name like 100 pro players, like just from memory. So
Right.
something
And-
happens there, and
And I think Lolly could definitely tell us that there are certainly high MMR women players in this game.
Oh, absolutely.
There we go.
mean-
See, confirmed from Dota Buff.
I think it's I think when you're looking at like people who are very high MMR, who are like on the verge of going pro or have the potential to go pro, who want to go pro, that there's a few extra barriers that women face. Like putting themselves in the spotlight and networking is immediately going to put more of a spotlight on them, put them more open toward criticism, have them start to deal with biases. Like, in order to be the best, you need to play with the best and play at a higher level. So getting pro-level players who are willing to play with you so that you can learn and get to that next level is really difficult. Like, for me, I've been working in Dota full-time since 2012. Like, I've been around, and, like, I'm not super well known in the community. I'm a little bit known in the community, but like I will go up to pro players and they will just like think I'm hitting on them. So like I just don't even go and talk to them anymore because there's nothing there's no value in it for me. They'll just think I'm hitting on them. But I could imagine, like, if I were a woman who is trying to go pro and I am trying to network, and all of these pro players who I just want to play with and I'm just there to play the game with think that I'm hitting on them because I walked up and talked to them, or avoid me because they have a girlfriend who's super jealous and they don't want to be seen with another woman. Like, that's literally what we're dealing with.
Right.
In that it's like, it's difficult for people to take you seriously, respect you as a player, but then also just like take you seriously as a viable potential pro player, because there's all of these other biases that they have to work through.
Yeah, I don't actually approach players at events to talk to them usually. I will make sure I get introduced, or I will wait for them to come to me, because the other way around is too difficult. Basically, there's too many possible issues. So yeah, if you want to talk to me, you can come talk to me, but I'm not gonna go out there. And
Right, and so like something like that, the conscious decision to not go out there because of the risks and the issues that you could face potentially, like that's one of the things that we're talking about when we talk about systemic issues. We're not saying that, you know, everybody in the scene is terrible and bad and horrible. We're saying this is consistently a barrier for a lot of women, and yes, I could take extra time and extra precaution to make it very clear that I'm here on a professional mission and I am not trying to hit on you. But there's only so much that accomplishes if on the other side the person isn't also saying, I'm not going to assume that a woman coming to talk to me is necessarily coming to hit on me. I'm going to assume that she's here to do a job just as I would assume a guy is here to do a job. If we make that our baseline assumption that, you know, someone approaching you at a business event or at a Dota event is there to either just be friendly or to discuss things professionally with you, and then, you know, change what you assume accordingly to how conversation goes, I think that's a fairly easy way to at least lower some of that barrier there. But, you know, really easy place to start. Guys who work in Dota, if a woman comes up to you at a scene, maybe don't assume she's a groupie. Consider the possibility that she's a professional and listen to her before you put her into that subcategory.
Yeah. And I have the issue, like, if I'm standing next to a coworker of mine, I want to include them in the conversation, and, like, people will just stop making eye contact with me and only address my coworker. Or, like, sometimes it's happened when I have a friend who doesn't even work for Dota Buff and I'm wearing a Dota Buff t-shirt, and they will start only making eye contact with this the male person standing next to me and ask them really specific Dota Buff questions. And they'll just look at me like, they know I don't work at Dota Buff, right? Like, what is happening? But things like that, where people just assume things about me because of my gender, or they'll assume that I'm, like, hired to hand out swag and I don't actually work with Dota Buff. And they'll be like, "Where's the swag from? Do you know anybody who works at Dota Buff?" Yeah. They're like, "Do you know the people who work at Dota Buff?" It's like, yeah.
Hello.
I do. I'm not like a hired model to, like, go hand out swag, you know? But yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think we've all experienced that. And, like, I remember in the Twitter thread that I mentioned earlier, I mentioned, like, when I was at TI the past year, you know, I'm talking to, like, a couple of players and personalities, and people kept coming up and handing the man I was talking to, like, a water bottle and being like, "You thirsty?" Talking to them. And I'm like, I'm a married woman. I am here with my friends, just, like, networking, talking to people. Like, why is this even, like, people just assume. Like, people assume that if you're a woman and you're in this environment, this esports professional, whatever, or not professional, however you want to look at it, you're there for sex, or you're a groupie, you're a wannabe or something, and you're not taken seriously. And I think that's a really important thing that you brought up, Lolly, about networking is so important. Whether you're trying to become a pro player, whether you're trying to become a caster, trying to become a personality, connections are in any industry, not just esports. Making connections and getting contacts that you can practice with and have opportunities, you know, presented to you, it's so important. So, you know, these stereotypes and, you know, the way that these stereotypes present themselves in esports is extremely detrimental to, you know, the opportunities that are given to women and the things that are, you know, as the main subject is are barriers to women.
Right.
And I mean, you can make it without networking. It's just difficult. Like, I didn't know anyone in Dota when I was started working in Dota.
Yep.
But yeah.
And this isn't to say that like it's not possible for a woman to network in Dota either, because it is possible. It's just there's a little bit extra more you have to do or prepare for or brace for in order to make it work. So like we're very clearly not trying to say, oh, this makes it all utterly impossible for women to succeed, and anyone who does is like a rare golden snowflake child, and you know they are special and should be prized. No, that's not what we're saying. But we are saying that like, hey, there's a reason that there are fewer women in this scene than it seems like there should be, and this is one of the things that contributes to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of extra effort that goes into giving exactly the right impression, and then if they assume wrongly anyway, making sure that they don't feel bad about making the wrong impression, while simultaneously imposing the correct image over their previous beliefs, that sort of thing. And so I will need 10 minutes of my talk to, you know, prepare someone to take me seriously, where a guy would just like get straight to the point. I can't get straight to the point. If I go straight to the point, people will just be like, what do you want?
And then you have to have a strategy for when people hit on you. As stupid as that might sound, if you haven't done it.
Yeah, no, because there's a balance.
Otherwise,
you, have
you wouldn't
to
be able to talk
between...
with anyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
like I have to make sure that like I don't entirely offend you in the process, because you are a valuable networking connection that I need to maintain some contact with. But I also need you to take me seriously, and I don't want you to hit on me. But I can't necessarily afford to make you vexed with me. And
right. You can't just like reject someone and walk away. You have to keep massaging the conversation into the appropriate
and
professional
there are
direction.
definitely times and places where you can just say, you know, I'm here for a professional reason, and the person can take it professionally and you can move on. Like there are times that does happen, but it's a gamble. Like that's not always going to be the response. And the fact that that's not always going to be the response, the fact that you have to walk that extra tightrope is just... I just want to talk to you about how we set up engaging a contract for my company to work for yours for this next event. Please don't hit on me.
I'm privileged in that regard, because I'm 6 foot tall. And people, it's true. People just hit on me way less, I think. Because...
So what you're saying, Kips, is I should get stilts.
Yes. If you would walk around everywhere on stilts, I don't think many people would be hitting on you.
That's true, although I probably would have reasons to do more with the stilts than with my, height because of the stilts.
People would be like, "Who's that weird person on stilts?" I don't want to talk to her.
It would be a memorable way. Like people would remember you for that.
Yeah, that's true. So one last sub point under this about how sexism manifests itself. Something, Kips, that you had brought up when we were talking and planning this discussion is basically unconscious biases about, and we've kind of touched on this, but what you had brought up, Kips, is about Shiver, and about how she would make predictions and how very frequently people would disagree with them, but historically she was very frequently correct. I wanted to ask you about that, and just if you could go into more depth about that and just kind of tie that in about various things about how people's biases, they don't realize it, but they might be more inclined to disagree with, a woman providing her, analysis or prediction or whatever, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for me, it kind of ties together the fact with, let's put it like this. If people primarily see you as a woman, they will react to you as if you are a woman, which is frequently disagreement. So for Shiver, she spent several years casting and watching the most ridiculous volume of games. The amount of games that woman has just made her way through is on par with anyone in this scene. But it took, actually a couple of years, I think, especially before the viewers really started to catch on that when Shiver says something about a draft, she predicts a hero, or about how things are going to play out, she is write a lot, and it took a couple of years before those comments started manifesting. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is something that I have used consciously as well, is that, well, you're a woman, people sort of instinctively disagree with you. And it's not much, just a bit like, is that true? But if they get familiar with you, and they start seeing you as an expert on the topic, then that changes. So once audiences or people that you work with become familiar with you, it starts to shift, and they stop seeing you as a woman and they start seeing you as a person. And
Yeah, I've experienced that in non-esports as well. That's a bias that I've experienced personally as possessing. I work in a hospital from 9 to 5. There are both male and female doctors there. And as a physical therapist, when it comes to what I do working on my patients, the medical diagnosis and the PT diagnosis aren't necessarily the same thing. And there are times when a medical doctor will make a PT diagnosis and it's incorrect. And so we're taught in school, you should always have some level of skepticism in your mind, and you should do your own examination to determine if what the doctor has said their physical therapy problem is correct. And I noticed after about a year of working at the hospital that I had more of a tendency to take with a grain of salt what a female doctor would say about my patient than what a male doctor would say. And neither of them were more right more often. Individual doctors tended to be better in certain things like that. But globally, the male doctors were not right more often than the female doctors were when it came to the diagnosis they were presenting me with. And, I'm pretty damn feminist. I hold feminist ideas. I am introspective and conscientious and reasonably intelligent, and I still had this bias. So when we point these things out to the community, we're not saying you're bad and you should feel bad. We're saying, hey, consider, stop and think about this. Is this something that's been playing into your thought process? And if it is, hey, you can change it. It's not a default state that you have to stay in for life. It is possible to see women as people and professionals first, and as women second. And that's okay.
I have
absolutely
used this... Sorry, do you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
I have actually used this in Southeast Asia, and I'm just gonna say it straight up, I'm using it in Russia right now as well. As long as my teammates see me as a woman first, they will have trouble listening to me, because it's ingrained. But if they see me as a Westerner first, I can override that bias with another bias.
You give them a different bias.
Yes, and the primary bias for Westerner is actually, competent. So...
It's a good bias to have.
Yeah, I mean, especially in Asia, it's this weird thing where white people, no matter how good they actually are at things, will get, perceived as better at it than others. As long as I could keep my team reminding of the fact that I was white, I could keep that in the front of their minds and keep them listening. And that is one of those things that perhaps, if you're listening to someone and you're wondering, why does she keep putting attention towards certain things that she's saying, or does she keep repeating her knowledge or whatever? There's probably someone trying to keep the fact that they're a competent person higher in your mind than the part that you have a bias against, which is, the woman part.
That's why I use more jargon with my esports patients than I do with my hospital patients. Although that's also partly because a lot of my hospital patients have dementia and I can't use jargon with them. But I do use more jargon when I'm working with somebody in esports, because if they see me as a medical professional first and as a woman second, then we're going to get the job done more effectively and more efficiently. And again, this is one of those things, this is preventing shit from hitting me, not preventing shit from being thrown. So sure, it's a thing I can do to manage the situation. It's a thing Kips does to manage the situation, and I'm sure Lolly has her techniques too. But it'd be really great if we didn't have to engage in this technique in order to be seen as professional, which is why it's it's really wonderful when members of the community take the time to introspect and say, hey, have I been doing this? Have I been seeing you as woman first and professional second when you're just trying to operate as a professional here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
amazing.
And well, the thing that Kip said about like trying to use the Western stereotype to her advantage, like that's just a way of trying to use privilege that you happen to have to your advantage. Like not everybody
Yeah.
who's a woman in the
Everybody has that
industry
option.
gets that opportunity. But you know, like I think it's just identifying things, because I used to have a lot of issues with bias against women because most of the I've worked in tech and been a gamer my entire life, so there's not a ton of women in the intersection of those things, and I literally just started exercising around other women, and it like over the course of time gave me more positive, like lower pressure, non-professional interactions with women, and made me so much less biased and so much more cognizant of the bias that I had against women. One thing that I
bias
always
is certainly not limited to men.
yeah,
No.
and like one
Yeah,
of the
no,
things
we're not
I
saying we're
noticed,
flawless.
yeah, I'm not perfect, right? I have lots of bias against women that I still probably struggle with and try to help identify.
Yeah.
But like one of the things that always stuck with me is when I would meet men in the gaming industry or in esports or something, and they would like clearly like me on a friend level. Maybe they aren't even interested in me romantically, but they would relate me to their girlfriend or wife. They'd be like, "You remind me of my girlfriend or wife," and it would just like kept happening. And I was just like, "Do you know so few women that that's like literally the only woman
only
you could
context you
compare me to?
Yeah.
Like, is that the only context? Like, we could all do with like having normal, low pressure, maybe outside of the industry interactions with women that are just, you know, positive and nice and aren't just like
Right,
our mothers and girlfriends."
That would, yeah, it's you know, as the father of a daughter kind of thing. Like, really, you have no other contact with women that gives you the context that there might be something off here. But I think that's kind of one of the good self-perpetuating cycles that happens is the more women are in this scene, the more people meet the women in this scene, the more likely they are to see them as professionals and not just as women, and in turn they will treat them as professionals, which makes women more likely to join the scene, which means there are more professionals available. That's a really good kind of cycle that we want to have happen as a result of just people seeing women as people first, not just women first.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
it has to do with just getting used to the idea. There is people often have adverse reactions against things they don't know or things they're not
Yeah.
comfortable with, and the only thing that's required in order to get more comfortable with it is repeat exposure.
Exposure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
representation is very important.
Right.
Seeing more women and interacting with more women, and you know, desensitizing the community
Yeah.
Yeah.
to women.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, essentially.
And that's one of the things that like I get annoyed when people talk about oh, are you saying that we need to have female figureheads in this scene, or otherwise, you know, women can't see themselves as belonging here and therefore they won't join? No, we're not saying that women are incapable of joining the scene without seeing women at the top of the scene that you're like, oh, that person looks like me. That's not what we're saying at all. It doesn't hurt, but that's not what we're saying. What we are saying is that the more women who are present in the scene, the more people are comfortable and not seeing women as this rare and exciting and exotic thing. You're less likely to say OMG grill when you've already played with a whole bunch of girls. Like, it's
Yeah.
just, okay, this is another person I'm playing Dota with.
And that's also that also rings with like esports companies that do advertising and production for events. Like, for example, the notorious PGL Women of Kiev video, or Ladies of Kiev, I think it was.
Right.
You know, they also have a role in promoting non-harmful stereotypes of women and not putting women up on a pedestal, because all they're doing is making it more difficult. Same thing with
Right.
advertisements of, you know, I mean, and this goes in any industry, but particularly for esports, as women who work in esports, and for many women who want to work in esports, seeing, you know, advertisements of, you know, guy playing Dota and his girlfriend's licking chicken wings and feeding it to him. You know, that's not helping us, you know, because then the majority, you know, a lot of the men that play Dota and exist in the scene, you know, it's just a vicious cycle.
Right, and there's like this, there's kind of like this misdirection of, oh, well, they're pointing out how, you know, how exciting it is to have women at this event, or, you know, oh, they are highlighting how beautiful these women are, or they're talking about how beautiful they look in their cosplay. Yes, those are positive things to say about an individual, but the women didn't go to that event to be featured on screen. They went there to watch Dota. The women didn't go in cosplay to be seen only as beautiful trophy statue. They put time and work and creative effort into the work that they did. And sure, they want the work admired, but that doesn't mean that they are there to be seen as trophies up on a pedestal. It seems kind of counterintuitive because people are like, well, don't you want women featured in this scene, you know, so that people know that there are women here and more women are likely to join. Yes, we do want people to be aware that there are women in the scene and there's a place for you here and there's a role for you to play. But when you present that role as thing to be featured on screen as rare, exotic, delightful, or beautiful, that's not helpful. That's detrimental. That means that a woman who comes here is going to feel like she needs to be a certain way or look a certain way or act a certain way in order to be accepted. And we should all just be able to come and play.
Yeah.
That's what it should be.
And especially when there's such a lack of diversity on, like, panels and things like that. I mean, pretty much the only, like, frequent panel member is Sheever. That's a woman. Other than that, right? Am I missing anyone? I don't think so, right?
No, and I know recently Secret's analyst was on one panel somewhere, but I remember hearing about it because it was a rare and exciting thing to have another woman who wasn't Sheever on a panel. And it's certainly not as though we're lacking in women who have good game understanding. Like, we've got those.
Yeah.
I know there's so many women that work in the scene that deserve so much more, and you know, like I said, you know, it's not only representation of women just playing Dota, but also working in Dota and contributing to the professional scene in the esports, you know.
Right. Recognition of their professional accomplishments, not just woman exists in scene is not a good narrative. Professional does good job is a good narrative.
Oh yeah. I've been invited to go on a couple of panels, like no big tournaments or anything, but I'm hesitant to take the job because mostly I am not actually panel talent. I am not an on-mic analyst. I do work with teams in a very personal kind of setting, and I use my personal connection with people a lot. So I would want to have a lot of practice for the real deal to actually be able to nail it once the moment comes, because I know I'm going to be scrutinized extremely heavily. Like, of course, everyone is, but I will be up there and people will say, oh, she's just there because they wanted a girl on the panel. And that sort of taste is going to be there, even for reasonable people, if I don't, you know, knock it out of the park the very first time.
Right. Yeah. There's less leeway given for you in that situation.
Yeah, it's essentially just an uphill battle for the most part, for any facet of a woman wanting to pursue a job in, whether it be statistics, working on the panel, working as a caster, you know, coach, behind the scenes, that kind of thing. So that we kind of talked about this a little bit, but this moves into like the next kind of segment, quote unquote, that I wanted to kind of address is like common arguments that people make about the very things that we're talking about. So I actually went through and I watched a couple hours of Thorin's videos on like women in esports or females in esports. And because you know, he's pretty well known, and I also watched some other videos of just like common themes of like people talking about women in esports and like common arguments that people make about women working in esports. And so I wrote down a couple of them. And so the first one, which we already kind of talked about, is the amount of women working in esports is reflective of the amount of women that play games compared to men, and just the fact that there's more men that play games than women, so we shouldn't expect there to be a lot of women on the panel or a lot of women playing professionally. So I kind of wanted to go through and like debunk these arguments. So we did kind of talk about this one earlier, but
yeah, Kips gave us math already. Even if only 5% of the player base is female, that would suggest that 1 in 20 players should be a woman. And we definitely, at 1 in 20 pros or 1 in 20 commentators, even if we generously expand it to amateur and professional level broadcasting, we don't have 1 in 20 as our current level of broadcasters. We've had women broadcasters, and a good deal of them have left. We've had a couple of female players, like Axe comes to mind, but that was brief and temporary.
And there was a woman on Wheel, right? I think they played through the qualifiers. They almost qualified.
Mm-hmm. And there are certainly there are female players who are high tier, and I know like there are players who are grinding and players who want to possibly do a professional career. I know Sheepstick talked to F3TI about that my goal next year is, I want to be capable of playing on a pro team. I know Effie is well into the 6Ks in terms of MMR.
Yeah.
It's not as though there aren't women who are capable of playing at that level, which suggests then that the issue isn't the number of women available, but other things going on as well.
Yeah. So the next one, which you also kind of touched on, but that specifically was mentioned, is if there was a woman qualified enough to be in X position, to be on the panel, or a woman qualified to be casting at TI, then they would be there, because there aren't any rules against women being allowed to participate in these roles. That's what I see all the time from people is, well, if there was no one's saying women can't do this thing, but if they were qualified enough, like if someone was as good as a caster as Odie Pixel, they would, if there was a woman that was like Odie Pixel, she would be casting. Or if there was, a female Red Eye, she would be hosting the panel, that kind of thing.
And that's not to say that there aren't very good female hosts, because there's a number of good female hosts in other scenes as well, so it's certainly not to disregard their accomplishments. But yeah, there's kind of this, I don't know, there's that expectation of, if there's a woman on a panel, there's that thought in people's mind of, is she there as a diversity hire? Is she there just because they wanted a woman? And then there's the immediate backlash of, well, if she's just as qualified as established male commentator that we all already like, why isn't that person there instead of this woman that they've hired as a diversity hire? Kip's touched on it too, about wanting to make sure that she was over prepared if she were to do panel work, because there would be that much less leeway available to her. And the other thing that I see happening with this is there was that article recently talking about who Esports has self-selected as their figureheads, and I'm not going to get into much of the article itself, but one of the things that was kind of suggested or implied was that people like Pansy or Frost were diversity hires, or were exemplars of the diversity that was being almost allowed in the scene. And the thing is, they aren't new. They're not diversity hires. They were here for a good long time because they put in the work. And I guess that outside perception that more women being added equals because of diversity being more accepted that's detrimental to our ability to grow as a scene as well. That disregards their professional accomplishments in a way that is intended to be positive. They're trying to say, oh, this scene is better now. But again, identifying women as women first and as professionals second, whether it's done with the intent of supporting women or done with the intent of things are fine the way they are, they're both detrimental.
Yeah, agreed. What do you all think about the argument about biological differences between men and women, leading to men being more competitive, so they pursue esports more, or, that kind of thing, or just gaming in general, I suppose?
I mean, I don't really think the science has backed that up, because there's the one study everybody cites where, men were slightly faster reaction times, I think it was, but, after people had practiced for, a little bit of time, the difference went away. So like I haven't seen that backed up by science. And then, you know, I genuinely think that like, oh, well, women are as competitive and stuff. Like I know a lot of women, like maybe myself included because I'm incredibly competitive, that are in the scene who have all of those traits that you think of as stereotypically male, and like maybe that's part of why they succeed or part of why they are attracted to games initially anyway, but it doesn't matter. It's not so black and white that there aren't women who fit the mold of what personality traits you think a pro player needs to have. So I don't know. I don't think that there's a ton of merit to like being like there are huge biological differences. I think it's more the societal differences that push
Speaking
people
as a
in
resident
different
medical professional,
Yeah.
you are correct that the science does not thoroughly back that up. And yes, there are certain areas where there are biological differences. Nobody's denying that. There is a role that testosterone plays in aggression and what we tend to interpret as competitive edge or passion or competitive spirit. That's not to suggest that women are incapable of being competitive. If you think that women are less likely to be competitive, I would invite you to go watch some of the U.S. women's soccer team or Brazil, which is even more terrifying. When it comes to the reaction time stuff, that's A, almost entirely eliminated by practice effect, and B, when you look at the highest tiers of players, the difference between players in terms of reaction time is so exceptionally minimal. And you see something similar with people talking about, should I be taking supplements to make my reaction times faster? If you are subpar, if you are less than the absolute highest echelon, then maybe the research supports that either practice effect or taking certain amounts of certain stimulants like caffeine or L-theanine will have an impact in your reaction time or your focus and attention and your visual memory. But that's talking about going up in tiers of ability. That's not looking at if you are already well practiced, if you already have that muscle memory, that established reaction time, there's really no difference to speak of that you would see as a result of either a gender difference or taking a stimulant.
Yeah.
Something
I think
else that I
go
want
ahead.
to touch on in terms of like differences that people often say are biological is, for example, people like to say that, you know, men are more aggressive, women are more talkers, you know, they talk a lot. Well, then what's up with all of our casters and commentators, etc., being men if women practice all of the talking more? And the same goes for skills like, you know, the traditional skills of being a peacemaker, or bridging divides, or you know, multitasking, giving different tasks to different people. Those sound like absolutely amazing capacities for a team captain. And we have a chronic shortage. Like, I'm not lying here. This is not exaggerating. It's just like that. There is a chronic shortage of people who are socially capable enough to captain a Dota 2 team. It's not about ability or insight. A lot of the people can't bear the social pressure, or they don't feel like the area where they need to improve is on a social level. If you look at the really good captains like a Kuroki or a Puppy, they have an incredible bond with their players, and they can push them, they can pull them, they can make them do what they want to through the sheer like personal connection they have. And well, if you know, biology or whatever is true, we are missing out on a great number of incredible female team captains.
Yeah, if we're suggesting that the reason there are fewer specifically, say, female team captains, if we're suggesting that the reason for that is biological differences, then the logical end progression of that argument is that all men are capable of being team captains, and there are plenty of exceptionally skilled Dota players in this scene who would be terrible captains, because that's not their skill set. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that they are biologically inferior for their inability to be a team captain. But perhaps there is more than just gender differences at play if we're seeing these differences between people of the same gender.
Emotion is a thing you can learn. Like, emotional skills are skills. And just because it's acceptable for women to have them and not really required for men to do so, doesn't mean that women are better at it. It's total bull.
They're more likely to be socially conditioned to have to do it.
Yeah, that's something that I could talk for hours about.
There was an interesting study that I read about on the business end of things, and it was looking at like what personality traits make a good leader for like leading a company, and like why. And it generally, those traits are actually like stereotypically female, like multitasking, like less concerned with taking credit and more concerned with empowering and supporting people around them. Like, like the stereotype of being like a good support and staying on top of things and helping people out and setting people up.
Crystal Maiden player?
Yeah, the Crystal Maiden stereotype.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that's not who people want to promote. As far as like the study found, it was like the stereotypical leader who's like fakes it until he makes it. Like that fake, like hyper-masculine bravado is what people think of when they think of a good leader. So it creates this weird bias where those people are getting promoted over the people who would actually on paper be the best leaders. And I imagine that, those are the sorts of things that are happening all the time in Dota, where the skill sets that women stereotypically tend to excel in are being undervalued, and the hyper-masculine skill sets are being overvalued, kind of irrationally at times.
Right, there's a disconnect between what we say we want, what we say should be valued or necessary in terms of doing a thing, and what we actually, in the end, choose.
Yeah, you can't have your cake and eat it. Either, this skill set is biologically female and therefore the women would be better at this than the men, but they aren't there. Or maybe it's not actually about biology and women are not there for other reasons.
Yeah. So just to kind of move on a little bit, when it comes to, there was something in particular that I did want to bring up about, I'm sure nearly everyone has heard about, the hashtag #MeToo and, women coming out about harassment. We've seen a lot of developments in the area of esports as well, of women talking about, sharing their experiences. And I feel like a very common train of thought for many men in the scene is if harassment is so common in esports, why don't more women speak up? Or, why, because I'm sure many of the members of our community don't want, to see harassment and don't partake in harassment. But, what are some reasons that women wouldn't speak up? And we did go through this in the Twitter thread a bit, but I wanted to touch on that in this discussion as well.
Well, I think first there's like the fear that nobody's going to believe you if you speak up about specific harassment. Also, sometimes harassment, it's definitely there, but it's not like you have this horrible horror story of like how you were sexually assaulted and how you did everything right and like you were still sexually like most life doesn't work that way. There's shades of gray in between. There are possibly like things that were misleading on both ends of the thing, and that's not to say that what happened wasn't wrong. It like absolutely was wrong. But you feel insecure enough about the details of the story around the incident that you're worried that it will be picked apart. And it's also important to note that often women who speak out, who are afraid of not being heard and afraid of it leading to potentially more harassment, they may still be around the people who harassed them. And even if they don't work directly with the person, they will have to interact with them on a professional level. And then that creates all this pressure of like, am I going to be able to find another job in esports if I speak out? Am I going to have to deal with this person constantly? And they're going to know that I spoke out against them. Am I not going to be invited to an event if they are going to the event too? Like, those are hard decisions to have to confront.
I mean,
where
are you going to be invited at all? There's often, if you speak out, you are difficult. And it's another one of those reasons that are going to happen for you not to be, hired. It's like
someone might view you as,
A troublemaker.
Yeah,
Yes.
a troublemaker.
And there's
more
also
trouble than you're
there's
worth. Sorry.
Yeah.
So sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. There's also I think one of the unintended and unexpected consequences of the Me Too movement is that people came out about things that had haunted them for years, things that were terrible and things that were awful and things that they clearly needed to talk about, and that I wish to God people had been able to come out about sooner. I wish that people had been able to be open about it. But then for a lot of people whose harassment is less severe than I was literally raped, there's this questioning of, is what happened to me bad enough to be considered harassment? Does this rise to the level? Was it really that bad, or am I just coloring it that way in my memory? And that's a shame that we've done a disservice to each other in that process, because there's still value in coming out about the smaller incidents of harassment, or the smaller incidents of bias, because everybody can see and recognize the really big, bad, overt sexism, the really big, bad, overt harassment and assault. Nobody's going to deny that it's a bad thing to be sending lolly death and rape threats. Nobody's going to suggest that, a woman who's been sexually assaulted shouldn't be able to go to the police safely. But when it's smaller things, it's often seen as this is not enough to need to go to an authority figure about. This is not enough that I need to speak out about it. And those small things, the small things that we don't speak out about, those are a lot easier to address. Like it's a lot easier to have a conversation with somebody one-on-one about, how they treated you, or a stereotype that you found that they hold about you. It's a lot easier for those things to be addressed by a community. But only if we're actually willing to talk about them and not assume that, well, because they weren't as bad as the worst possible thing that could have happened, it's not worth addressing until it gets worse. No, it's worth addressing now, before it gets worse.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because like Kip said, and really all three of you have pointed out, is, for a woman that's, say pursuing a career in esports, and she's running into biases, she's running into stereotypes, she's running into even harassment, whether, overt or, microaggressions. These are things that end up leaving her with a choice. Do I speak out about this and potentially ruin all the work that I've done, or have it be ruined by being perceived as difficult or causing trouble with someone who's higher up than me and will make it impossible for me to find a job? Or should I stay quiet and just try to keep my head low and keep putting in the work? And I feel like that's just like something that many women have to deal with, and that's something that we shouldn't have to deal with, which is why these kinds of discussions are so important, so we can try to set a standard, and get people thinking about, what could I be doing to contribute to this kind of environment where we're putting women into these situations where they're left with, a bad choice and a less bad option.
And one of the things that's equally valuable is, having a place where we can have these conversations, is having people that we can have these conversations with. I have a good friend, a guy who's an organization's manager across multiple esports teams. So he came to me for advice, which I appreciated. He said, look, I have a woman who works in, a junior capacity to me, and she had a question about the boundaries between personal and professional relationships with somebody else, and I don't know whether to be bluntly honest with her about, this is the way esports is right now. It will come back on you professionally if you are personally involved with this individual, or if I emphasize that this is the way it is, but not the way it should be, or if I tell her to go for it and damn the consequences. And we were able to have a valuable conversation about what are the risks and benefits of each of those approaches. And in the end, he decided to basically tell her about, here's how the scene operates right now. Here are things as they are realistically. Here are things as they should be, but they aren't yet. You have the choice to make this for yourself. Whatever you choose, I will always speak about you as a professional. I will always make sure people who ask me about you know that you do good work. And having somebody who has your back like that is a really valuable thing to have in this scene.
It's amazing.
And as much as I hate to say it, it's even more so helpful to have men who will have your back like that in this scene.
If men speak up, people listen to them more. Is why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is also there's a balance between men speaking up on behalf of women, which can absolutely be valuable. It totally can. But then there's also a time and a place for amplifying women's voices too. And I can't say with 100% certainty which is always the right decision. I would be lying if I claimed that I could tell you when it's right to speak up and when it's right to amplify somebody else. But it's always good to stop and consider, would this be listened to if a woman said it and I publicly supported her saying it? Or would this only be listened to if I said it? And hey, talking to women who are in the scene is a helpful way of determining that. We're not that we always want to do the labor of that, but that's a good and valuable thing to ask the women around you.
I am totally prepared to do that labor. It's one of the things that I have come to terms with a long time ago, that one of the prices you pay for being very visible, I mean, a price, like with great power comes great responsibility and all that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, did you have something else to say?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have thought about these things a lot. I can explain them very clearly. I have had these kind of conversations a lot. I have invested a lot of time into it already, so if someone wants to talk to me about these issues and will be respectful,
genuinely receptive,
yeah, and will do something with, like, someone who comes to me for advice, please do it, because I think I am a very good source of advice for these kinds of things, and I'm more than happy to contribute to making this a better place for everyone.
Right, and this is one of those, here's the world as it is, and here's the world as it should be kind of things. It would be really great if women who entered the scene in a professional capacity could do their jobs and just do their jobs. But the world as it is that there are people who don't fully understand, who by talking to women who are prominent in the scene, who are professionals, might gain that ability to understand, or might at least be willing to listen. And so sure, I wish this were not a thing that women who just want to work as professionals were in a position to do. But the world as it is,
yep.
If people are going to ask questions in a spirit of genuine interest and are going to listen and be receptive and engage in productive conversation rather than defensiveness, then hell yeah, absolutely ask me.
Yeah, agreed. Also, just throwing that out there. Obviously we're talking about this because we all care. And I think that a very important thing is that I think a lot of men underestimate their role in, making the community more welcoming to women. Because, like Lolly said, men are more likely to listen to men than they are to women. And while men aren't 100% of the problem, of course, like we've said, most of these personalities and people that work in the scene are men, and they're looked up to. They're role models to many people. And also, for women that are pursuing to work in the scene, it's really reassuring to know who is your ally and who, might not be, because you don't know, someone's inner thoughts and what they think about you. But men that make it known, like, hey, I'm here to listen, I want to help, just saying something like that and putting it out there, even if you might not know what you can do to help, but just leaving the floor open, say, like, I'm here for you, is very helpful.
I think that's
right. And also, I think it's also valuable when we're approaching these conversations to approach it from the perspective of never attribute to malice, but can be more accurately attributed to ignorance. Yeah. And even if it's not true, even if the person is asking maliciously, even if they are engaging you in an attempt to troll you and not because they actually want to listen to what you have to say, you can stop responding. You are not required to continue responding. But approaching it with that mindset of maybe it's just ignorance means you're much more likely to be able to have a conversation with them, and they're much less likely to feel defensive about having asked you in the first place. And it is not always an easy thing to do. There are many questions that are asked in a genuine spirit, which are similar to questions that are asked maliciously. But if you're able to take that perspective of this person is asking because they genuinely want to know, and in return, if the person who is asking could only ask because they genuinely want to know, that's addressing both the shit being thrown at you and the shit that is being thrown.
Yeah.
Or sorry, the shit that is hitting you and the shit that's being thrown. There we go. There's shit everywhere.
I think a lot of people underestimate that, they are just asking questions, but they don't know that the questions they ask leave them indistinguishable from the people who are completely uninterested in any constructive debate whatsoever. So it might feel insulting or weird or vulnerable, but try to qualify in some way that you are there to listen, because
yes, if the person asking the question can make it clear in any way, I have a genuine interest in this. This is what I've tried to find out on my own already. Indicating that you've put in effort to try and understand it makes the person that you're asking feel as though you're not just using them as an encyclopedia, but I have tried and I have failed, but you seem someone knowledgeable. I'm going to ask you for that reason. It seems like a mark of respect rather than an expectation of providing knowledge.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then being vulnerable and being like, I don't fully understand this. I don't have all the answers. Can you help me understand this a little bit better? Is really helpful.
Yeah.
Guys, it's almost like both sides being willing to listen is necessary to a conversation or something.
I think that kind of humility, it can be hard to do. Like, if you might not see yourself as part of the problem, or even recognizing that you have a privilege, the word that we all hate, it can be difficult to do that. I think I remember Red Eye retweeted you, Kips, after you had been talking to Ben a bit about that Twitter thread, and I remember him saying something along the lines of, thank you, Kips, it feels really good to know that, I can ask questions and not be attacked and that kind of thing. And sometimes it is on our end, it can be, since like Kate, you've said, we've got shit constantly thrown at us, so it can be hard to determine what's the shit and what's genuine, someone trying to navigate, to make it better. So for men that are listening, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you can't see it on the outside at all, especially on the internet. All you have is someone's words, and if that person's words are the exact same as those of all the people who have tried to troll you, or it's just one sexist joke, right? But if it's that is
20
what
sexist
we know
jokes
of
in
you.
a day, yeah,
it's we need to make snap judgments, and if it looks like you're here to, contribute to the problem rather than and it's nothing about you, it's about the fact that you as the person approaching don't know how many others are also approaching that look the exact same, have the exact same words, but they mean something different.
I think that's definitely a disconnect.
And in the same way that a woman who's willing to be asked these questions, like we've made clear we are, is, needs to accept some amount of vulnerability or assumption that the person asking is genuine. The person who's doing the asking also needs to be aware, if you ask someone and they seem defensive or put off or not interested in asking your question, and you are frustrated because you are asking genuinely or because you do not see yourself as part of the problem, it really isn't you. It is not that person you are asking hates you or loathes you or finds you disgusting or anything like that. It's just a wariness that has been established justifiably by other people asking not in good faith. And so anything you can do to indicate I'm asking in good faith helps make that interaction that much better, in the same way that us doing what we can to assume you're asking in good faith makes that interaction that much better.
Yes, for every 10 people that ask me if I'm a 12-year-old boy or a girl, one of them is probably genuine. but I'm going to tell all of them to go fuck themselves. So I apologize, but, you know, that's just kind of an example.
Yeah. Particularly when people try to argue about gender on Twitter, it's really easy for people to be defensive or be focused on
for sure,
winning an argument or winning a like side conversation of an argument because half of your tweet was confusing or something like that, rather than like, genuinely trying to dig in the issues and like approaching something with an open mind and being willing to be vulnerable.
And that's one of those things that, like, we all recognize that Twitter is so utterly shit as a medium for having deep, in-depth, and nuanced conversations. And yet we all keep doing it anyway.
It's where everybody's at.
But I can also see why we'd want to have those conversations publicly, because we do want people to see the productive results of those conversations that occur. The problem is, even if we're having them online, and even if by some miracle they turn out to be productive, that also means that, you know, an entire internet's worth of peanut gallery can chime in and derail things. And so there's that striking that balance between having this conversation publicly so that more people can reach the same point of understanding, and having the conversation privately, which means it might be more productive, and then later sharing the results of the discussion online. It's not an easy balance by any means to strike.
Yeah, I mean, there's no perfect way to go about everything, you know, it just depends on the situation.
I consider all of my Twitter interactions to be performative, basically. And
Twitter is definitely performative. What you were saying about, you know, winning an argument or winning a side, it's who's going to get the thing that's got one right phrase that's going to get all the retweets and all the attention. Or who's going to say the thing that can be taken out of context and immediately demonized. And neither of those things are productive, because in one they just reinforce in an echo bubble that I am totally right, look at all these people agreeing with me, or this person is totally terrible, look at all the people shaming them. That's the difficulty of Twitter as a conversation medium for nuanced topics.
Who can goad the other into providing ammunition?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, when it comes to discussing, you know, the struggles and the uphill battle that women face in esports and in Dota, the most important thing is to listen, you know, and to be patient, because like we've all said, you know, both sides can be on edge, because not only just no one wants to feel like they're part of the problem or be accused of being sexist or, you know, that kind of thing. And on the other hand, you have a group of people that are constantly being dealt, you know, shit thrown at them. And so it can be hard to navigate that and read tones on the internet and that kind of thing. So I guess to sum it up, I mean, the general consensus, if I'm correct, is to come in with an open mind, to be, you know, have humility, and to be able to listen.
And I think also to keep in mind, there's a time and a place for these conversations. The time to ask me about sexism in gaming or things women face is not when we are trying to negotiate a professional contract or when we're trying to have a professional interaction relating to the work that I do or the work that you do. That's a personal conversation to have, and respecting women as professionals, that absolutely does mean, you know, being willing to introspect or to ask for help when you need it. But the time and the place for that is not when they are acting in a professional capacity, but in their downtime.
Yes, if I'm giving an interview and you have a question about what is it like as a woman in esports, I will most likely decline to answer it.
Because there's no good way to answer that when it's a blurb. There's no good way to say, you know, it's a mixture of a variety of things. There's no good way to break that down.
I've said enough about the topic, and if you want to read my opinions on it, people can go Google it, they can find it. But right now, if people interview me, I want it to be about the things that I have done and the things that I am going to do in the future.
That sounds fair to me.
Professionals first, women second.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, it's not every woman is signing up to educate everybody else on, you know, what kind of uphill battle that they're facing. Some women don't want to deal with that, and it's not, you know, they don't have to dedicate an hour or two, you know, talking on Twitter or responding to you about, you know, and that's okay. But, you know, there are, like we've said, we are, you know, many of us are open, and we make it known, like, hey, we're here to answer questions. We're here. We want to work with you to make it better. But, you know, anyone listening also should remember that it's not every woman's duty to educate you, or any other minority to educate you on the struggles that they face, because they're already living in that reality, and they might not want to have to teach someone who doesn't live that reality about, you know, their own struggles.
Yeah, there's
But,
so many of those interactions. I think that is the thing that I wanted to touch on, like, the last. It is I linked it to you all in the preparation before we went here. But basically the fact that a minority is by definition less people than the major group, right?
Mm-hmm.
It leads to overwhelming amounts of interaction of the same sort from like the big group towards the small group. So the example was about sexism. If all of the men in a group that's 80% men make a sexist remark, and all of the women, like 20% women, do as well, the chance for a man to get a remark is lower than, you know, 100%, and the chance for a woman is higher. And it goes like this for every interaction. And especially for requests for, you know, educate me, you might be not just the first person that week, not even the first person that day that asked, hey, can you spend time on me? And even, like, I am personally very well prepared to talk about these topics, but I also have a 24/7 job in an extremely demanding industry. Like, if I do this more than 2 times or 3 times a week, you're taking away, like, what, 3 or 4 series of replays that I could be watching? Is you chronically underestimate the effect of that, just the sheer volume of men versus women has on all of those interactions. So please do consider if you really need to hear it from me personally, or if you can look it up somewhere else, because I field a lot of questions, and it's not because men are bad or uneducated, but it's because there's more of you.
Right, and it's we're not saying don't ask questions. We're saying be considerate. That's all.
Yeah.
And we definitely we're all aware that if we say go look it up, you know, the results that you're going to get by Googling are not necessarily the same answers we would give, or as nuanced as the things we discuss. And I think that's why a lot of us are willing to make that extra effort. But in the same way that, you know, we have to be willing to make time and to listen, you have to be willing to accept that there are other things that we're doing, and we're not putting you off. We're not saying we're thoroughly uninterested in discussing anything with you ever. We're saying that you are not the only person asking, and your questions are not the only thing that we are addressing in our lives.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a few more minutes, so we're going to try to kind of ease into wrapping it up.
All right.
So let's end on an educational note. So what are things that each of you believe that, or what can people do to make gaming, esports, and Dota more welcoming to women, particularly?
I guess the hardest part, but also like the most direct part, is that as men, you're not just responsible for, you know, what you say yourself, but you're also a tiny little bit responsible for what your friends say, because you do have influence over them. You have more influence over them than we do. It's just like that. If someone makes a rape joke and you don't say, hey man, that's not cool, then you're a tiny little bit part of the problem. Because
right, you're allowing that to be perpetuated.
Yeah, as long as it's socially accepted to do that, then I have to sort of yeah, I have to listen to that and be reminded of, one night 7 years ago. And that's, yeah, like, I can call
Yep.
it out. I do call it out. But I'm only one person, and they're not likely to listen to me like they're likely to listen to you. So please, small things, baby steps. It helps so much. You have no
And
idea.
and for anybody who's not certain as to whether or not that actually does have an impact, I can tell you, so in my time leading Standard Deviants, and even before I was there, one of the rules was, it was basically no marginalizing already marginalized groups. But one of the things that specifically was not okay was making rape jokes along the lines of, oh, I just got raped by a Slark in mid, or, I just got, mass raped by that Legion commander all game. And it got to the point where it wasn't just the mods who would say, like, hey, dude, that's not okay, or hey, pick a different word. It never even needed to get to the mods. Members of the community would say it, and then it got to the point where members of the community didn't need to say it because nobody bothered doing it in the first place. Yeah. Especially when it comes to words like that, there's this concern that people are being censored, or we're taking away your right to free speech. You have the right to say that word. You absolutely do. Nobody's denying that fact. One thing, the First Amendment refers to the ability of the government to prosecute or not prosecute you for what you say. And two, you are welcome to say a thing. People are welcome to respond accordingly to what you say. If you have the option to be considerate or compassionate or to recognize this refers to a thing that was the most traumatic event of a person's life, I mean, hell, the English language is pretty damn expansive. It's really great at stealing words from other languages. There's so many words you could pick instead. If you have the option to, why wouldn't you? If you have the option to suggest to your friends, hey, pick a different one, why wouldn't you? It's a very low-cost thing to do that makes esports feel a little less unfriendly to women. Or to rape victims, which can also be men.
Yes.
And it goes the same for other jokes targeting.
Right, it's not just that, it's not only that word, that was just the example we picked.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, the first main point is just, like, for men specifically, is you're, not only make an effort yourself to be aware of what you say and do that might affect women's comfort around you, but also if your friends are partaking in some kind of behavior or speech that, could be a deterrent to women being involved in the scene, it's also your moral responsibility to speak up, and that's appreciated because a lot of people don't want to listen to women. They will listen to their friends, though.
Right. I would also say, like, take a little time to educate yourself. Like, doesn't have to be a lot, but, like, when you see a really good article about, like, gender bias or something, it doesn't even have to be in esports. It could be, like, in the workplace or something. Take your time and read it. Like, make an effort to read those things and learn something. And then even just something as simple as, like, when there's a thread on Reddit that's all about a woman, like, just downvoting the really bad comments or, like, upvoting the really nice ones that aren't, like, trying to pick apart part of her or whatever. Like, I'm not saying that, like, nobody's saying you can't criticize something about a woman, but you guys know the threads that I'm talking about, where it's basically just about sexism.
Criticize productively, not the boobs.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically, if it's a criticism you'd give to a guy for the work that he did or the job that he did or the attitude that he possessed, cool, awesome, use it for women too. If it's a criticism that you'd give to a woman because she wasn't appealing enough to you or was too appealing to you, especially talking about the cosplay threads, like, if that's the criticism you're providing, it's not necessarily valuable. Yes, you have the right to that opinion. Nobody's saying you don't have the right to that opinion. What does it accomplish? Does it do anything useful?
Yeah. That's a big point that I want to bring up. Like, a lot of threads about me devolve into endless, like, people questioning my ability and then people defending me with a lot of vigor, which I appreciate. But the problem is that the reason that the thread is there in the first place is probably because I gave an interview or I did something. And nobody is talking about the thing that I did anymore. So, I am not, like, don't be the guy that just upvotes mindless praise either. Like, I'd like both of those things, both, like, the mindless hate and the mindless praise, to be low on the list and have people drown it out with, constructive discussion and interesting thoughts about what happened, what I did. whatever.
Yeah. Discuss
Absolutely.
our professional capabilities.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what about this? How do we start these discussions with our friends or professional contacts? Since one of the things we mentioned was talking to our friends if they're doing something that's negative.
I think one of the things that I found is that as I've made it clearer to people, even just, individually, telling this person or that person, hey, I'm willing to answer questions if it's helpful. I am somebody that I know you respect. I'm somebody that you'll at least give the time of day to. If you have questions, go ahead and ask them. And the consequence of that has been people ask genuinely. I have a very low rate of people asking me trolley style questions, and I think that's because, I mean, yes, there's some filtering involved, but as I've made it clear that I'm willing to be asked questions, the kind of people who come to me with questions are the kind of people who ask genuinely. That's how we ended up with a situation where the general manager of an organization came to me and asked, "Hey, need your advice on this thing." So making yourself honestly available, as vulnerable and as difficult as a thing it can be, that does have value, that does have payoff. And in the same vein, we can absolutely take steps to start those conversations, and that's something we're discussing right now. But at the same time, the people with whom we are having conversations need to take steps to be open to them. If one half of the party isn't listening to the conversation, it's not a conversation.
Yeah.
It's about establishing respect.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you make clear that you respect whoever's on the other side of this conversation, it's so much easier already.
Oh gosh, yeah.
The other part is the vulnerability. Like, I mean, respecting someone is vulnerability in a way. It's saying, hey, I am willing to put my own opinion aside to seriously consider yours. So those two things are what I look for in all of my interactions, but especially in those on sensitive topics like this. And it's surprising how how painful, how many painful things you can say to someone as long as you like genuinely show that you say it because you respect them and you want them to be better and to understand, instead of, being defensive and lashing out.
Yeah. I actually really love direct, harsh criticism. As long as it's, like, about the work, not about my gender, not about bias. I think it's the fastest way to get better at something, and I personally enjoy it.
The same goes for these kinds of discussions. Like, if you can establish respect and vulnerability, then it's good. And I have worked with some, some very difficult people just professionally, and that is, like, it's amazing. You get better so much faster. So the same is about this. If you are willing to listen to the harsh truths, perhaps, then it will be so easy. Well, maybe not easy, but at least, productive, swift.
Yeah. And that's not as though, and that's a thing that goes for both genders, certainly. Everybody has different feedback styles, different learning styles, et cetera. But if you are willing and able to be blunt and honest, and I don't mean to be harsh or to be cruel, or to be malicious, but to be straightforward and honest and respectful of the other person's time and availability by getting directly to the point. Like, there's value to that. There's productivity that comes from that. There's actual results that you get.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that sums it up nicely. Were there any other closing thoughts that y'all wanted to add in relation to this discussion before we close out the show for this time? Any other points you wanted to throw in that you wanted to make sure to include? Or is that pretty much cover it all for this time?
We covered it.
I think we hit all of it.
Okay, good.
Pretty thorough, I'd say.
Good. Okay, well, we are about up on time. I know, Kate, you need to be somewhere. So,
I do.
while this is certainly a topic that can elicit hours of discussion, we covered a lot of interesting topics and experiences today. I'd like to thank you guys for coming onto the show and sharing your experiences and your opinions. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
for
thanks
sure.
so much.
I hope that we can do this again. So before I close the show, I want to be sure to let the listeners know where you can find all of us. You can follow Lolly on Twitter at Lollipop, Kate at Kate McGee PT, and Kipspol at Kipspol. The links to their social media are going to be in the description of the program as well. You can also find me, the host, at Leafy Peachy, and keep up with other Desoladies news and projects at Desoladies. If you have a topic that you'd like to request for Cooldown, please let us know and look forward to more episodes. Take care, and thanks for listening.